Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, we were just talking the other day on the live stream about how historical figures are complex, that a lot of times they're in morally gray areas, and a lot of the reasons why we tend to judge them is based on our modern sensibilities about topics that maybe we're seeing differently at the time. And all of that is just to say that most heroes, whether they're in stories or in real history, if they're real people, they tend to be complex. And that means that they're capable of great good and beneficial things, but they can also have some very negative aspects to their character. And I think that's true for most people. As a Christian, I see that a lot in biblical characters. For all of the things that Moses did that made him a hero in the Bible, he also had a temper and could get himself into trouble and murdered a guy once. David is this great hero who's described as a man after God's own heart, and then he goes and has an affair and gets the woman pregnant and then has her husband killed in battle intentionally to cover it up. Morally despicable, but also capable of great good. And that's true for a lot of our historical heroes as well. So with that in mind, the channel Chill Dude Explains has a video called Historical Heroes Who Were Actually Awful People. So this will be an interesting topic to discuss. I'll put the link down in the description so you can check it out without my commentary. I want to thank Jeff W., who signed up as a patron a couple of months ago. Thank you so much for your support, Jeff. Couldn't do it without you. Let's dive into this one.
Let's get right into it. Number 10. Mother Teresa's Terrible Truths. Mother Teresa, known for helping the poor and sick in India, wasn't exactly running a 5-star hospital. Her hospices were described as houses of horror. Sick and dying people would go hoping for help, only to find volunteers with zero medical training. They reused needles until they were blunt, jabbing patients until they couldn't pierce skin anymore.
So here's my question about this, and I'm not disputing any of this at all. My question is, would they have gotten better help elsewhere, or was this better than nothing? In other words, was she giving them more than they would have otherwise had, and therefore it's harder to criticize it? But I don't know the answer to that.
Basic hygiene rules weren't being followed. Pain management wasn't really her thing. Mother Teresa believed suffering brought people closer to Jesus.
That's
true.
So
instead of
and that's not just Mother Teresa. That's a view among a lot of people within the Catholic Church. I'm not saying all. That's why I say a lot of, because I've heard that a lot, especially from popes and things like that. And there's some truth to that. I mean, there's some truth to the idea that that Christians are not meant to live opulent, wealthy, comfortable lives. I think that's a very biblical concept. How it plays out, another story.
Proper pain medication, patients experienced what she called beautiful suffering. Her organization collected millions in donations. But instead of using that money for proper hospitals or basic medical supplies, most of it disappeared into bank accounts. A famous Indian athlete visiting one of her hospices found conditions so horrible, he ended up vomiting outside. The place literally smelled like rotting flesh.
Wow.
Meanwhile, Mother Teresa traveled first class around the world and got the best medical care money could buy when she got sick. Number 9. Gandhi. Gandhi is known as the peaceful resistance guy, the champion of nonviolence. But young Gandhi had dark views history teachers often skip. In the 1890s, 23-year-old Gandhi arrived in South Africa as a lawyer. Instead of fighting racism, he supported it. He wrote terrible things about black Africans. He called them savages and raw in his writings. While fighting for Indian rights, he actively worked to keep Indians separated from black Africans.
This is not necessarily inconsistent with a lot of people. You know, you fight for your own people, but you can still look down on other people, and you see different classes, and you see the British as being the enemy at this point because they're the occupiers. But that doesn't mean that you also at the same time think everybody should be equal. You just want equality for your people.
He argued Indians were superior and should be treated more like white people. When Indians were forced to use the same entrances as black Africans, Gandhi didn't fight for equality. Instead, he demanded separate entrances for Indians. He wasn't just
very American of him at that time.
Passively racist for the time. He actively wrote and argued for racial segregation. This lasted for years during his time in South Africa. He did change his views later in life, becoming the Gandhi known for peace.
And give him credit for that. I mean, I give credit to anybody who can hold such strong, extreme beliefs and change. Hopefully that's what we all aspire to. Hopefully most of us aren't awful people to begin with, but I say this all the time. If I look back 5 years from now on who I am now and don't think, man, I'm glad I'm not that guy anymore, then I'm doing it wrong. I should always be able to look back on who I was and say, man, I've come a long way in the right direction, but I have a long way to go. That should be the goal for all of us.
But the man famous for fighting oppression started out supporting it. Number 8, Churchill's shadowy policies. While Churchill was giving inspiring speeches in London, he was also making dark decisions that led to millions of deaths in India. Consider the Bengal famine of 1943. This wasn't because the crops failed. Scientists have proven there was plenty of rain that year, even above average. This was because Churchill's government kept exporting rice from Bengal, even when people were literally dropping dead in the streets. They implemented the rice denial policy. British soldiers destroyed massive amounts of rice to keep it from potentially falling into Japanese hands.
And I think this is usually what people point to when they say Churchill was an awful guy. And I've seen people debate how much of this policy by Churchill really contributed, and I confess I don't fully understand it. I have no reason to think it didn't contribute to it, if this is at all accurate. But it still does not put Churchill on the level of a Hitler or a Stalin. When we go back to Darryl Cooper and his argument that Churchill was the real villain of World War II. Because when Darryl Cooper made that argument, he didn't mention all of this stuff as being one of the primary reasons. No, he mentioned participation in World War II.
Imagine watching soldiers dump your food into the water while your family is starving. When local officials begged Churchill for help, he blamed Indians for breeding like rabbits. This was a man-made catastrophe that killed up to 3 million people. That's like wiping out the entire population of Chicago, all because Churchill decided feeding British soldiers was more important than keeping Bengali civilians alive.
I don't necessarily disagree with prioritizing the soldiers in the middle of a world war. If they're intentionally destroying food rather than giving it to people who need it, that's a different story altogether.
Number 7, Edison. Thomas Edison wasn't the lone genius we learned about in school. He ran his workshop like a sweatshop for brains. He had dozens of inventors working for him, all competing against each other, and when someone came up with a brilliant idea, Edison would slap his name on it. His name ended up on all the patents, not theirs. Edison would watch other inventors fail, then swoop in, make tiny improvements to their ideas, and claim the whole thing as his own invention. His whole tireless inventor image was basically just really good PR.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to take Edison completely out of the equation and say that he wasn't a brilliant inventor. But no person does these things in a vacuum and does them on their own. And Edison was really good at his own PR. And he was really good at doing things that benefited Edison. That's absolutely true. But these people also didn't have to come work for him. Especially once they knew what he was doing. They could have done this some other way. Now, you could argue, okay, well, but Edison gave them opportunities they might not have otherwise have. And that may be true. But I think it's a little more complicated than just simply Edison stole everyone's ideas and wasn't really an inventor for himself. No, he was a brilliant inventor and often, yes, did take people's work and build on it and come up with his own thing. But that was what a lot of inventors did. The Wright brothers didn't just poof out of nowhere invent the airplane. They built on the work that a lot of other people were doing simultaneous to that. And those people built on other people's work too. It's just the nature of things.
It's less of a genius inventor and more of a genius at taking credit for other people's work.
I think both
Number
are
6,
true.
Jefferson's jumbo hypocrisy. Thomas Jefferson wrote, "All men are created equal," while signing slave purchase receipts. He owned over 600 slaves during his lifetime. At his mansion, Monticello, slaves did everything from cooking his meals to building his house.
And the pro-Jefferson argument here is that, well, Jefferson was in such great debt that he couldn't legally sell his slaves or legally free his slaves. And yeah, there's some truth to that, but the reason he was so in debt is because Jefferson had to live such an opulent lifestyle that he spent more money than he had. And so if he was really concerned with the plight of the hundreds of enslaved people that he owned, he could have found ways to free them from that situation.
Sally Hemings was one of Jefferson's slaves who bore several of his children.
And I've talked about this one before. I'm not going to get into it with you people again who are going to try to convince me that Thomas Jefferson's brother fathered these slaves. It just isn't feasible. It denies reality to say that it was anyone but Jefferson.
The man who wrote about freedom and equality literally enslaved his own kids. His children were born into bondage because their dad decided keeping them as property was more convenient. While Jefferson wrote about liberty and equality, his own children lived as property. Yep. He talked about education being...
And they were only 1/4 white, or 1/4 black, by the way, because Sally Hemings was the half-sister of Jefferson's deceased wife. She was the child of her owner. So Sally Hemings herself was only half African, of African descent, which made his children only 1/4 of African descent.
Essential for democracy, while making it illegal to teach slaves to read. He actually acknowledged that slavery was wrong, then just kept doing it anyway. He kept this up until the day he died. So next time someone quotes Jefferson about equality, remember this was a guy who couldn't even treat his own children as human beings. Number 5. Sims' surgical sins. J. Marion Sims is called the father of modern gynecology, but his story is dark. Back in the 1840s, he experimented on enslaved women without anesthesia. Women named Anarcha...
No one really had anesthesia in the 1840s. We were, starting to toy with things like ether and chloroform, but...
Lucy and Betsy, who couldn't refuse because they were considered property. Sims performed the same painful surgery over and over on these women. Anarcha endured 30 operations without any pain relief. These weren't quick procedures. Some lasted for hours. He performed these experiments even though anesthesia was already being used for white patients. Sims thought black women couldn't feel pain like white people.
Oh my gosh.
He convinced slave owners to let him experiment by offering to do it for free. These women were kept in a small hospital behind his house, waiting for the next operation without painkillers.
Yeah, that's pretty
awful. When
he
finally perfected his technique through this torture, he started using anesthesia, but only for his white patients. Today, some of his statues have been taken down because people realized he built his career on torture. Number 4.
Guy was like a regular Joseph Mengele.
Columbus, the governor of grief. When Columbus landed in the Caribbean, he brought smallpox, measles, and influenza. These diseases spread rapidly. Up to 90% of the local population died in some areas. That's like 9 out of 10 people in a room dying.
Yeah. Let's be clear, though. They didn't come over and think, how can we kill 90% of the population by giving them diseases? Yes, we all know about the incident with the smallpox blankets, but that was a pretty isolated thing and not the norm. The reality was just that they brought those diseases because Europeans had built up tolerances to those diseases that made them less susceptible to it, whereas the folks in the Western Hemisphere didn't have that. And it went the other way, too. There was a form of... And I say a form of syphilis that Europeans got exposed to and that they brought back. I think it first showed up in Italy in the late 1490s. Yes, syphilis existed in Europe before that, but not the form that was brought back from the New World. It doesn't excuse any of the treatment of the natives by Europeans as Europeans came over, but it wasn't an intentional act.
On his very first day in the New World, he started grabbing natives to use as servants.
Yep.
He wrote in his journal that these gentle people would make excellent slaves. Once he became governor, he turned the islands into his personal nightmare factory. He forced people to work in gold mines until they dropped dead.
That all goes back to the motivation that led Columbus to be able to get over there in the first place. How did he sell his expedition? There could be gold over there, and it could make the Spanish crown rich. So he had to follow through on that. And he did, and it was absolutely brutal. They were exploiting these people, there's no doubt about that.
If natives didn't bring him enough gold, his men would cut off their hands. Then he forced them wear their severed hands around their necks as a warning.
And then similar things happened later in Africa when you have European colonies exploiting Africa.
Dismembered bodies paraded through the streets to keep people in line. When natives tried to fight back, he had them hunted down with war dogs. He shipped thousands of natives to Spain as slaves. Many didn't survive the journey. The ships were basically floating coffins. Columbus was so brutal that even the Spanish crown arrested him for his cruelty. Number 3. Leopold II's savage stewardship. King Leopold II of Belgium
There's nothing heroic about this guy. He's not a historical hero. He is just historically an awful person.
Convinced everyone he was bringing civilization to the Congo. He even set up the International African Association to make himself look good. But he turned an area 76 times bigger than Belgium into his personal piggy bank. He wanted rubber, fast. So he gave his soldiers orders. If villages didn't meet their rubber quotas, they'd get wiped off the map. His soldiers would force villages to collect rubber from the jungle.
This is not talked about enough. I mean, the exploitation of Africa in the 19th century as a whole, I don't think is talked about enough. Once the United States starts to come into power and we start talking about the Monroe Doctrine and a lot of these countries start throwing off the shackles of Europe and Central and South America, European focus shifts to Southeast Asia and to Africa. And they start doing even more awful things to Africa than they had done to the natives in South America.
If they didn't bring enough, his men would cut off their hands, not just the hands of the workers, but women, children, anyone they could catch. His soldiers had to prove they weren't wasting bullets on hunting. For every bullet they used, they had to bring back a human hand. Sometimes they'd cut off hands from living people just to save bullets. They'd even make people bring them baskets of hands to prove they were punishing people. Millions of people died under his rule. Maybe up to 10 million. That's like wiping out half the population of Belgium at the time.
Horrible.
The crazy part is, while all this was happening, Leopold was in his palace in Belgium. He never even set foot in the Congo. When journalists finally exposed what was happening, he burned all the evidence. Belgium eventually had to buy the Congo from him. Number 2. Walt Disney. The man behind Mickey Mouse and Magical Kingdoms had a darker side. In 1941, Disney's animators went on strike because they were overworked and underpaid. Walt took it personally. He publicly called the strike leaders communist agitators.
Yeah, that was the popular thing to do in the 1940s, though, right? I mean, you're starting to deal with the Red Scare, and even though we're in the middle of eventually get in the middle of World War II for the U.S., everybody already saw communism as a threat.
He testified before Congress that the strike was part of a communist plot. He created the happiest place on earth, while making his own workers miserable. Walt also didn't hire female animators for creative roles. Women applying for animation jobs got letters stating they could only trace other people's work. Many classic Disney films are filled with racial stereotypes so harsh they are difficult to watch now. Disney now puts warning labels on them. He built an empire on making children happy, while making the people who created that happiness miserable.
Not sure I'd put him on the same level of the likes of Christopher Columbus or Leopold II. But okay.
Number 1, Andrew Jackson. The guy on your $20 bill came from nothing and became...
Yeah, can we get Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill already? I think that'd be pretty awesome.
President. He was called a man of the people, specifically meaning white settlers who wanted free land. Native American tribes were living on their ancestral territories. Jackson looked at that land and decided to kick everyone out, so he passed the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Soldiers showed up at Native American homes, gave them minutes to grab what they could carry, then forced them to walk hundreds of miles through snow and rain. This forced removal of nearly 50,000 Native Americans led to the Trail of Tears. Thousands died from cold, disease, and starvation.
Yeah, so you're dealing with a lot of folks who are moved from the eastern U.S. to reservations in places like modern Oklahoma.
Jackson ignored the Supreme Court when they ruled the removal illegal. He justified all this suffering by saying it was for national prosperity, and his face is on money now.
And he took advantage of the fact that a lot of people had the mindset of manifest destiny, and they viewed these Native Americans, many of whom had kind of westernized in terms of their culture, like the Cherokee, but viewed them as kind of in the way of that. And manifest destiny and slavery are two of the driving forces behind so much of the 19th century politics and decisions that are made. A lot of really awful decisions. All right, what else would you add? Who is someone else in history that many people view as a hero that you really think was kind of an awful person? Let's talk about that down in the comment section below. Let me know your thoughts on the people we did talk about, what wasn't mentioned. Do you feel it was fair, unfair? Do you think there's more to the story? Let's all learn collectively together from one another. I want to thank Tanner True and Pinkerton12, both for your support on Patreon. Could not do this without you and with all of our incredible supporters through Patreon and through membership. Thanks for watching.